Hello once again, this is Mrs. Politsky, and I have AP Psychology, Chapter 7 Cognition Notes. And as we go along, make sure you can find your place in the notes so that we can begin. We're going to talk a little bit about the components of thought. So what are the components of thought? Well, thinking is a cognitive process in which the brain uses information from the senses and emotions and memory to create and manipulate mental representations such as concepts, images, schemas, and scripts. Thinking is also a very complex act of information processing in the brain by which we deal with our world of ideas and feelings and desires and experiences. Concepts like déjà vu, which is French for seen before, this is a feeling that can be an illusion. It also reflects the brain's ability to treat new stimuli as instances of familiar categories. The ability to assimilate experiences into familiar mental categories and to take the same action towards them or to give them the same label is regarded as one of the most basic attributes of the thinking organism. Mental categories that we form in this way are called concepts, and concepts are among the building blocks of thinking because they enable us to organize knowledge into systematic ways. Two types of concepts. One, everyone for the most part conceptualizes the world in a unique way, so our concepts define who we are. Many cognitive psychologists believe that we all distinguish between two different types of concepts, natural concepts and artificial ones. Natural concepts are the mental representations of objects and events drawn from our direct experiences, like everyday experiences of the world. Your own natural concept of a bird invokes a mental prototype, and that is a genetic image that represents perhaps a typical bird from our experiences. A prototype is the most ideal representation of an example. Natural concepts are sometimes called fuzzy concepts because they are impressions. So artificial concepts, artificial concepts define rules such as definitions and mathematical formulas. So by comparison, artificial concepts are those defined by a set of rules, such as a dictionary definition or mathematical formulas. Artificial concepts represent precisely defined ideas of abstractions rather than the actual objects in the world. Concept hierarchies. These are levels of concepts from the most general to the most specific, in which more general levels include like a dog or a giraffe or a butterfly. We organize much of our declarative memories into these concept hierarchies. For most people, the broad category of an animal can have many different subcategories. So below here we have an example of such a concept hierarchy. So you have an animal, and then you have the fact that he has skin and he eats and he breathes. But sometimes animals could be birds, they could be fish, and even among the categories of birds and fish, they can be divided even more into canaries and ostriches or sharks and salmon. So, visual thinking. Visual imagery adds complexity and richness to our thinking, as do images that involve our other senses like sounds and taste and smell and touch. Visual thinking can be useful in solving problems in which relationship can be grasped more clearly in an image rather than in words. So a cognitive representation of a physical space is a special form of visual concept called the cognitive map, and cognitive maps help us get to our psychology class or home. They enable us to give another person directions, perhaps to a restaurant. Cultural influences and also cognitive maps. A mental map also is seen to reflect our subjective impressions of our physical reality. Thus, maps that we have in our minds mirrors the view of the world that we have developed from the perspective of our own culture. Thought in the brain. Cognitive researchers have invented ways of mapping the mind and we might see something called an event-related potential, and these are basically shown in brain waves, such as EEGs, in response to stimulation. So a computer can average many brainwave responses to a single repeated stimulus. Other methods can also tell us which part of the brain switch is on and off while we're thinking. There are two broad findings. Thinking is actively involving widely distributed areas of the brain, not just one thinking center. Brain scans have revealed the brain as a community of highly specialized modules, each of which deals with a different component of thought. The brain generates many images used in thought with the same modular circuitry it uses for sensations and perceptions, and thus visual images drawn from our memory arises from the visual cortex, and auditory memories obviously come from the auditory cortex. The prefrontal cortex takes on three different tasks, such as keeping track of episodes, understanding the context, responding to a specific stimulus in a situation. Another development involves the location of brain circuits that seem to be associated with common sense and also intuition. Psychologists have long known that when people make decisions, whether about buying a house or choosing a spouse, they draw upon feelings as well as reason. This emotional component of thinking apparently involves regions of the frontal lobes. Psychology in our life. Schema scripts also help us know what to expect. So much of our knowledge is stored in schemas, and schemas are, if you go back and think about what we talked about as far as guys like Piaget, they are knowledge clusters or general conceptual frameworks that provide us expectations about topics, events, objects, people, or situations in our life. The expectation, when we talk about schemas, these are one attribute that Google and other search engines lack, but for us, schemas provide us the context and the expectations about the features likely to be found when we encounter familiar people, situations, or ideas. Making inferences. New information, which is often incomplete or ambiguous, makes more sense when we can relate it to existing knowledge that is stored in schemas, which enables us to make inferences about missing information. Schemas are the primary units of meaning in the human information processing system, and back in 1975, Donald Norman and David Rummelhart comprehended new information by integrating new input into what was already known. If you find a discrepancy between new input and existing schemas, it can be overcome by changing what you know or using something called accommodation, again going back to Piaget, or ignoring the new input, as when the concept telephone was revolutionized the introduction of the cell phones. Scripts as event schemas. These schemas help us to decide what to expect or how people should behave under specific circumstances. A script is a cluster of knowledge about the sequence of events and actions expected or occur in a particular setting. Cultural influences on script. Scripts used in other cultures may differ substantially from our own. So an example was back during the First Persian Gulf War, American women who were stationed perhaps maybe in Saudi Arabia and Arab localities, discovered that many of the behaviors that they might have taken for granted at home, such as walking unescorted in public or wearing clothing that showed their faces or legs or driving a car, were considered scandalously inappropriate by citizens of their host countries. To maintain good relations, these servicewomen had to change their habits and plans to accommodate to the local customs. Controlling scripts. When people follow similar scripts and get together, they feel for the most part very comfortable because they have comprehended the meaning of the situation in the same way and have the same expectation of each other. Thank you very much.